All right. So we have Forrest, Baseball History Dork. You can follow him on Facebook as well. So make sure you do that. He puts out a lot of great stuff, just as Justin does. Harrison and I have fallen in love with both of your pages. We think they're absolutely incredible. They're great reads and it's great content. The reason why we have them on, because we want them to also have a platform to share the stories with everybody. So Forrest is going to run down some history of some old team nicknames.
Love it. We actually had John was asking in the chat about Gibson's vision. Was there ever anything reported in terms of what his vision actually was, how bad it actually was?
No, I mean, there's a story about him going to a party and Willie Mays seeing him without his glasses, or with glasses on, sorry. And Willie Mays was like, what's going on? Why is he wearing glasses? And one of Gibson's friends was like, yeah, he always wears glasses. He just doesn't wear them on the mound. And I guess that scared Willie even more, because then he was thinking, well, he can't see that well. He's not going to be able to control the stuff. And Willie Mays, he hit under the Mendoza line against Gibson for his career, as 180 or something like that, where it wasn't very high. So the glasses thing ended up helping him out, at least in intimidating Willie Mays a little bit.
Yeah.
I can't imagine there's a lot of guys that have better success than Willie Mays anyways, but
yeah.
Scary.
Yeah. All right.
Am I here?
You are here, Forrest. Go ahead whenever you are ready.
All right. Sorry about that.
You're all good.
Yeah, so what I am here to go on and on about is just some of the team names throughout history that are a little more obscure. Some of them are a little less obscure, but just something that I find interesting, former team names of the current MLB teams. And this is something that even when I was a kid, I found really interesting, because I'd be reading old baseball history and I'd see these names and I'm like, who is that? And it kind of made me look into it a little more to put together the pieces. And I don't know, it's something I've always been interested in. So the first one there on your screen is the Twin Cities Twins. Right after the Minnesota Twins, or after Minneapolis found out that the Washington Senators were going to be relocating to Minnesota, the owners of the team wanted to call it the Twin Cities Twins. The AL president, Joe Cronin, just said that we're not going to do that. And it wasn't because it was monotonous, Twin Cities Twins, because Minnesota already had the St. Paul Saints. It was more just that Joe Cronin didn't think that nationwide fans would understand what the Twin Cities was. It wouldn't recognize that as a place name. So I guess it wasn't something that people heard of as much as they do now. I mean, I think people from around the country probably know Minneapolis, St. Paul as the Twin Cities. Maybe I'm wrong. But that's where the Twin Cities Twins came from, and that's where the logo comes from, the two guys crossing the river, shaking hands, making peace between St. Paul and Minneapolis.
That's cool.
And then
a lot of beef between St. Paul and Minneapolis, those two cities. I've only been to St. Paul, Minneapolis a few times, but is there like a rivalry there between the two cities?
Well, I mean, there was back then. There was a pretty good rivalry. They had the St. Paul Saints, and then they had the Minneapolis Millers. They were both pretty stellar minor league teams, and it was a divide, a very definite divide between which team you followed, I think, back in those days. Cool. So nice. I think having the Twins in town is kind of brought people together.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So the next one is the Washington Senators. Before the Twins, they were the Washington Senators from 1901 to 1960. The reason I'm putting this up here is because from 1905 to 1955, most of the American League Senators history, they were actually officially known as the Washington Nationals. Now, back in those days, names were not very official usually, and American League teams would generically be known as the Americans. National League teams would generically be known as the Nationals. But like I said, they're in the American League, and they were called the Nationals.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Speaking of Washington, this is a picture of the viewers have probably seen. It's 1974 when the San Diego Padres came this close to moving to Washington, D.C. And they came so close that, as a lot of people probably know, the Topps baseball cards actually said Washington National League instead of San Diego, the first printing anyway. And so this is actually the mock-up of what was going to be the Washington Stars uniform. But there was a time when they were going to be called the Washington Pandas, or at least that idea was thrown around a little bit. And it was because the Washington Zoo had just gotten a pair of giant pandas from China, and it was a sensation. So they were going to name the team after the pandas. And frankly, I think that's better than Nationals.
I'm with you 1,000%. Give me that nickname all day.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm buying that hat in a minute.
Isn't it like the trash pandas in the minor league system somewhere? Somebody's
I've heard of the trash pandas.
Yeah, the Rocket City Trash Pandas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so pretty cool. Yeah, but that's a raccoon. It's not an actual panda.
Yeah,
true.
But, nice.
Yeah. Yeah, well, semantics.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Next one, the Philadelphia Blue Jays. As you can see, it says Phillies, but it was around about 1944 when the Phillies had not been very good for very long in a long time. And the owners held a contest to rename the team, and Blue Jays was the winning entry. From 1944 to 1945, the Phillies logo actually had a blue, although I think they kept the name Phillies. It was just kind of like they're in limbo. But the Blue Jay was present there on that logo for a couple of years.
I mean, Phillies saying that they were, not very good. I mean, that's an understatement. They were horrible for a very long time.
Yeah.
They were not a good franchise for forever. So, I mean, it's not the first time I've heard of a story of some of these franchises just kind of throwing it out, whether it's for like the team name or for like a mascot, where they'll just kind of like publish it in the papers and they'll be like, all right, guys, let's vote for it. Let's mix it up and just try something new.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I mean, I've heard of this, but didn't know the reasoning why, but it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So
they actually had a theme song called Blue Jay Genie, and that was 1947. That song was big. And by 1950, I don't know, I guess the fans, the office was all for it. They thought Blue Jays all the way, but the fans weren't having it. They liked Phillies. So I think the front office were the Phillies.
Yep.
So that kind of died out.
Nice.
And that was that.
The Blue Jay Genie theme song. You gonna serenade us with some lyrics to it?
That would be amazing.
I was trying to look it up, and all I got's the "I Dream a Genie" theme song. Not the same thing, I don't think.
No, absolutely not. I've definitely heard of the Houston Colt 45s here, but I don't know the history behind it or why they ended up changing it to the Astros. Any of you guys know why?
I'm not sure why they went with Astros as opposed to the Colt 45s. I doubt it had anything to do with like when the Washington Bullets changed their name. I doubt it was anyone's like, this gun theme is a little too edgy for us.
Yeah.
I think that probably was not the reason.
Yeah, I'll tell you what though. Today they'd be forcing them to change that name because somebody would be offended by it.
Oh, 1,000%.
And I think that's kind of where I was going with this, because I wanted to mention how the Washington Bullets in the NBA, for example, it just wouldn't Colt 45s wouldn't fly right now. I don't know if that's where you were.
Yeah, that's pretty similar to what the discussion we were having for sure.
Yeah, just the fact we don't know the history of them.
I actually I don't know why they decided to change the name at that time to Astros, other than just to honor the space program. But what I did want to mention though is what really catches my eye about this is that Colt 45s, as far as I know, that's a brand name. and a brand of firearm. And it just kind of struck me as really interesting that a Major League Baseball team would be named after a brand or a product.
Oh, yeah.
Were the Astros owned by them maybe at some point? Were the Houston Ball Club owned by them? They must have had some connection to it, I would imagine.
That is something I would think so. I haven't found any evidence that they were under the same ownership. But it's just quite possible. Maybe somebody watching knows a little more about it than I do. But
yeah, it's pretty cool.
I mean, maybe that's the next step for team names is just also malt liquor. Maybe that's the next step for team names to go ahead and just be the Houston Chick-fil-A.
I forgot about that part.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only thing I'm seeing about the change to the Astros was they're the 45s from 62 to 64. Well, the Astrodome was being built. And then when they moved in the Astrodome in 65, they changed the team name to the Astros to try to connect all the space dots there.
Yeah. And the Astrodome was supposedly like, this wonder of the world that people were obsessed with and was supposed to be, this is the wave of the future, these domes.
Yep. Yeah. But yeah, Forrest kind of touched on this too, was the whole trademark issues with Colt 45s and all that stuff. So maybe that's what it was, and they, the ownerships weren't the same. But yeah,
it's funny how some of these like things in history, like there's so little written about them, but other things that like really seem so irrelevant, there's so much written about them.
You're right. Yeah.
Like the who was the really short guy that got walked and had one plate appearance that you see stories circulating about?
Eddie Goodell.
Yeah. One at bat.
Yep.
So this one, and like I mentioned earlier, some of these early team names were not even close to official. They weren't like trademark names like we have now.
Well, if you're kind of reading that, I like how it says they lost their Papa Anson. So they're talking about Cap Anson.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that's where he's going with the orphans on that one, because Cap Anson was the leader of that Chicago franchise eventually they became the Cubs, but that franchise was like super successful in the 1880s. So that was like the first dynasty in the National League was the Chicago Cubs franchise.
Yeah. 1,000%.
You guys know anything about the Boston Rustlers?
I do not. I've never, like these last few, I had no clue on any of these. Like these are 1911. It was the 41st season of the franchise, it says. Yeah.
So that's is that the Red Sox franchise?
No, I think the Red Sox and the Braves were all separate.
Yeah. So that must have been the Braves. Do you guys have a lot of, as Red Sox fans, are you guys pretty deep into like Red Sox history back at the turn of the century, like early 1900s? Or is that not something that Red Sox fans really, now that you guys have won a championship in recent times?
I mean, like, we don't really talk about like that history that much anymore. Cause I mean, like we leave the 27 rings in the past. Like we don't really talk about it, but I mean, we know they were successful back then, but just had 100 years in between. But I mean, I've never really hooked on to the history part of baseball as much as I have recently, like just reading your guys' stuff. So that's why we have you on. Like, I love it. So
Cap Anson left after 22 years, and the writer of that article that was on the screen suggested orphans, and it stuck for a little while, but again, it wasn't very official. And then they changed the name again, which I'll get to later on, actually.
Did they go to the Bastards after that, or no?
What was that?
Did they go to the Bastards after that, or?
Oh, that is a very good idea.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a Cardinals fan. I'm sure you'd love that. The Rustlers were, in fact, the team that is now the Atlanta Braves. And the team before that, or the Boston team before that, was owned by a pair of brothers by the name of Dovey. So from 1907 to 1910, they were called the Doves. And then a bloke named William Russell bought the team, and he changed the name to the Rustlers because I guess that sounded tougher.
Yeah.
And then that only lasted a year. And then I think they were the Braves right after that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the Cleveland Naps, they're the Cleveland Guardians now. And they became the Naps because of Napoleon Lajoie, or Lajoie, however you pronounce that. I believe it's Lajoie. But they changed the name, or they started referring to the team as the Naps anyway, in his second season. He was that appreciated and dominating as a player. Back in those days, players were seen as just like otherworldly figures, I think. And so
That's all. Like I always pronounced it LaJoy because I didn't know the actual pronunciation of his last name. But so
Yeah, we were talking
something I
about
know.
that strangely the other day. I think it's La Joie. I think. I'm not 100% sure. I think if you go with more of a French accent, then it sounds more official. So if you're like La Joie, yeah, then it sounds right.
You don't want me to do that. So all right.
I'm gonna hold off on attempting to pronounce that.
Yeah. So,
anyway, and then another in a string of teams that were named after players and owners and managers, the Brooklyn Robins from 1916 to 1931. The gentleman on the screen there, Wilbert Robinson, he managed the team from 1914 to 1931. And as soon as he left the team, they changed the name again. But they were the Brooklyn Robins, and they won 2 National League pennants under that name. So, just given this string of teams, like I said, that were named after managers and owners, it got me thinking about today's baseball, and I immediately latched on to John Fisher with the A's. And I thought, what about calling the A's the Oakland, Las Vegas, Sacramento Fisher Kings?
that'd be a good one.
The Arthurian legend of the Fisher King is something like he was the last in a line of kings that was tasked with guarding the Holy Grail, except he was quite inept in many ways, and the kingdom fell into disrepair under his watch. And I think that matches what's going on with the A's quite well.
Yep.
Though I think it's unfair to name the players after that, though. But
Yeah. I'm all for that name
seems
change.
like it fits.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
That'd
the
be
New
awesome.
York, I think the New York Yankees already got, New York judges. I mean, that would fit well. Los Angeles Mookies.
All right. It's
Mookies.
not bad.
The LA Otanis.
That's more
Yeah,
like
I
it.
think, Otani maybe. The Mookies sounds better though. It's got better ring.
I like
The Los Angeles Freeman. Oh.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Mookie's just sounds like a baseball nickname for some
It
reason.
really
Like
does.
a team name.
Absolutely.
I don't know what the logo would be, but anyway.
Just Mookie's face.
Yeah, right. We're not even gonna hide it.
No.
All right, so going back to Brooklyn, and this is the same team, this team that's the LA Dodgers now. But so back in the 1890s, for a while, the team was called the Bridegrooms or the Grooms, just based on the fact that several of the players had been married at the same time, and they just started calling them that. However, they weren't very good in 1898. In 1898, they won 54 games. They switched their name to the Superbuzz. A lot of people say Superbuzz, but I'm pretty certain it's Superbuzz because superb. And they actually were. They went from 54 wins to 101 wins after changing the name to the Superbuzz. And they won the National League in 1900. So they won the National League 2 years in a row under that name, and then they drifted off. But for a while, Superbuzz worked for them.
That's cool. I had no clue about that one.
I think that franchise used to be they were the Trolley Dodgers before all
And
of
the
that
Trolley
too.
Dodgers.
Yeah, just for dodging, trying to avoid getting hit. in the
Listen, I
busy
could go on
Brooklyn
and on
streets.
about every name that every team had, but yeah.
Such a New York name, the Trolley Dodgers.
Yeah. So speaking of 1899, that's when the Purblos came to be. But that same year in St. Louis, it was like the bridge year between the St. Louis Browns and the St. Louis Cardinals. So the Orioles aren't the only team that used to be called the St. Louis Browns. But in 1899, between Browns and Cardinals, they were called the St. Louis Perfectos, and they were far from perfecto. They finished in 5th place. They had a pretty decent record. I think they won maybe 85 games, but still finished 5th. And the thing about that team is they were the team that was under the same ownership as the infamous Cleveland Spiders, who infamously won 20 games and lost 134 that year. And being under the same ownership, they shifted all their talent from Cleveland over to St. Louis. And that's what happened to the Cleveland Spiders. But like I said, it really didn't do the Perfectos a whole lot of good. But
Yeah, one of the big names there, that was Cy Young going from the Spiders to the St. Louis franchise. So, I mean, those were there's some big names. Jesse the Crab Burkett was one of the guys that that they threw over there. So they had some, I mean, there was multiple Hall of Famers that were shifting from that Spiders franchise to the St. Louis franchise.
Wow.
It was devastating. Wild. I mean, the Spiders were a championship team like 5 years earlier, if not less. So
they were the same owners? It was the same ownership? Is that?
Yeah, the Cleveland Spiders.
The Robinson brothers or something like that?
Was it the
It was the Robinson brothers or something was their name. Yeah, they
like
owned
that.
both franchises, and basically, you know, westward expansion, St. Louis was the bigger city, so they wanted to ditch Cleveland because they weren't bringing in as many people.
Yeah, probably still want to do that, but anyways.
That's a theme for Cleveland.
Man, that's crazy. Yeah, imagine if like the Yankees and the Dodgers were owned by the same, and they did that right now. Yeah. We'll just take Judge, Garrett Cole, put him on the Dodgers. Why not? Crazy. That's cool.
And then the last thing I've got, actually, it's not on the slides, but speaking of St. Louis and the whole feud between the Cubs and the Cardinals that I mentioned earlier, found it interesting. I should have put it up on the slides, but you could find it. It's out there. Right after, they were kind of known as the Orphans for 4 years, 1898 to 1902, and then it wasn't long after that they actually officially became the Cubs. But in 1903, there was a St. Louis writer who suggested that the Chicago club call themselves the Chicago Microbes. So basically calling them a disease or a virus. Right. I mean, if that's not funny. You know, start a feud, that's
right.
Yikes.
We should just have every like rivalry fan base name the other team that they're rivals against. That'd be incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, you want to start some name calling.
Yeah, right.
Those could get pretty rugged.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome.